When we talk about a microdose, we're really talking about a small dose.
Thinking about your relationship with plant medicine as a process is a huge reframe for me.
It took me psychedelics to understand that I could kind of take pause and explore me and my inner kingdom, is what I like to say. The number one thing beyond knowing where your medicine comes from is to go start slow and go slow.
What our lives mean, how we experience it, how we feel, how we change are the true bottom line as to why psychedelics matter.
The number one message of the medicine is really connection and helping us to really take a step back, and we are so much similar to all of us.
Welcome back to the Webdelics podcast, where we have a wonderful guest today, Maggie Kirkwood. Maggie, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Scott. Thank you so much. I'm just so pumped to be here and looking forward to having a epic conversation with you today.
And we are stoked beyond stoked too, especially as we introduce the topic that you're going to share with us. This is a personal story that's really affecting about how psilocybin taught you how to grieve. Something is behind that general summary. Why don't you roll us into it by telling us exactly how you got involved in the world of psychedelics and what led you to psilocybin in the first place?
Well, again, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I appreciate any moment I can to just really normalize conversation around psilocybin and mental health. And yeah, I'm just really ecstatic to share my story with you. Let's see here. Back in my college days was the first time I, dabbled with psilocybin. It was always recreationally, alcohol was involved. I just remember having some fun times. And then, yeah, life happens to us. I married young, had a pretty difficult start to my marriage. My now ex-husband, he came from Australia. Our parents never met. We had a lot of loss in our early marriage, just multiple miscarriages, and we actually lost a baby boy quite late in pregnancy. And I don't know if it's just the Midwest or something that kind of trends in life, but it's something, this idea where something happens and you think you're healing and dealing, but really it's just a lot of kind of like sweeping under the rug and just on with your day. So the reason I bring this up is there was a lot of loss and some struggle, and instead of kind of turning to do some work, there was just a lot of escapism. So I would find myself escaping with alcohol, and he was gambling, and we did everything to run from each other and not really kind of sit with ourselves and look at the reality of the situation. So yeah, as I mentioned, my kind of choice to escape would be to drink wine. And I suddenly was just like in this pattern that I really hadn't recognized, but I was miserable and I was crying every day. And I'm not a religious person, but I would essentially pray to my grandparents. And now I'm going to have to back up. But yeah, like I said, we had experienced quite a bit of loss, and I had lost a baby boy at 23 weeks pregnancy. Shortly after that, my older brother, his baby son, passed away. And that evening, I was tasked with calling my grandfather and sharing the terrible news about my nephew passing, his great grandson, and he passed away that evening.
What?
So yes, it was just, kind of trauma after trauma after trauma. And when I was in my days of escapism and just really kind of realizing how miserable life had become for me, yes, I would pray to him. And divorce was not in my vocabulary at the time.
Mhm.
I just kind of thought to myself, this is it, another 40 years of sticking with it.
Mm,
Um, anyway, so I I knew I wanted change. I knew that alcohol wasn't serving me. I just didn't have anywhere to turn. And it's interesting. My father, he's a recovering alcoholic, and he runs his AA meetings, and he's a real stand up guy in that community. And he was the last person I felt that I could turn to, and heading out to some treatment center was just not feasible for me. So I just want to make a point. I was just feeling so isolated, and I really truly felt, this was my secret. I was feeling so much shame around alcohol, because I was hiding it. And yeah, I just felt so lonely, and I decided to call a friend of mine. I said, hey, drinking buddy, let's go grab a drink. And he said, Maggie, I haven't had a drink in 30 days. And I said, I was mad, but I
mhm,
said, what's going on? He told me, I've been microdosing magic mushrooms. And I think just hearing him say that, it was almost like, I don't want to say something clicked, but I had just had curiosity around it, because I remember in my college days, kind of just it being this recreational drug essentially. And I said, okay, sign me up. And my intention really was just to try and quit drinking maybe for a week.
mm,
So he was a very responsible friend, and he set me up with some psilocybin microdoses. And they were these beautiful chocolate truffles, and each one had half a gram. So we're talking about a higher end microdose. I'm sure the audience understands. But yeah, I for the first time, he walked me through this idea of being intentional when we're using the medicine. And I I had 5 of these chocolate truffles, so I had 5 days to kind of do this exploration. And yeah, I just remember the first day, I truly did take my little chocolate truffle and I held it to my heart, and I just had a really simple intention. It was just help me to feel normal today without alcohol. And I think almost immediately, after consuming this half gram, it was just, you're not at this point of major intoxication, but it was just kind of like this overwhelming feeling of warmth, and almost like a little gentle hug from the universe.
mhm,
And um, yeah, it was like this 5 days. I really started to understand just all of the patterns associated around alcohol, and why I was choosing to use it to escape, and understanding my father's addiction, growing up with him, and his father's addiction. And I don't know how to explain it, but in the course of 5 days, it was like this switch was flipped. And it was almost like the mushrooms were saying, Maggie, you don't need alcohol. You don't um, it's not serving you. And it was kind of like this idea, if you have us, you don't need it. And it really got me going, to start looking into alcohol too. So I was looking at the effects of what alcohol does to our brain, and in turn, kind of researching on my own what psilocybin was showing to do. And that was, at this point, this is about 3 years ago, there was some research out there that it was helping with alcohol use disorder. So I thought, in a matter of 5 days, this flip has been switched. I don't need alcohol, maybe again for the rest of my life. Why aren't we all freaking out about this? Here, growing up, my father was in and out of sobriety for 40 years. And I just was sitting, kind of sitting back going, wow, what just happened? And I guess ultimately that just, piqued my interest, and I've been exploring and been a student ever since. And I've had all sorts of journeys that I'll happily discuss, but it was really just that was the catalyst. These 5 days and really just helping me to understand and frame my life around alcohol and my relationship with it. And like I said, there was so much shame that I had, and it was this 5 days of just being felt like I was being held and understood, kind of, and heard. So it was pure magic.
Wow. I
Yeah.
guess kind of all any reasonable person can say to that. Let's step back a little bit. Where are you from? Where do you live?
I grew up. Well, New Brighton, Minnesota. I've lived in Minneapolis for about 23 years now. But yeah, Midwest girl. And I will preface, alcohol is everywhere. And if you Google the drunkest counties in America, there's a ring around Wisconsin, and it bleeds into Minnesota. And I truly believe it's an environmental thing. So yeah, kids in Wisconsin, they can drink if their parents are at the bar. It's very confusing. Anyway.
I never knew that. That's fascinating. I raised that because although I am a hardcore stone cold New Yorker now, I grew up in the Midwest. I went to college in Minnesota. And because of that, I'm familiar with the culture there. One of the things that I feel listening to the early part of your story around grief and trauma and not being able to feel connected with people that I think is important for folks to understand as they hear your story is that I found there were I love Minnesota. I think it's an awesome place to live, but it's not the most effusively warm, friendly, and open place, right? To be right. New York, right?
Absolutely.
We'll curse you out in a minute. We'll also hug you, whether you want it or not. The emotions are just out there, and so it's very easy to feel connected. And New York has so many weirdos you can fit in anywhere, but Minnesota was not like that at all, right? This whole term, Minnesota nice, and people were always unfailingly polite. But when I went to college there, I found it very difficult to break into friendship circles with those that were from the upper Midwest. And I want to emphasize that because you're not just talking about having the trauma. I mean, this is essentially 3 deaths all at once, including your own unborn child, which is one of the most traumatic things that can happen to anyone, I would imagine. But you're in a place where there's not this fundamental culture of connectivity. And now hearing this, there is also sociological sociologically supported um, culture, a culture in which there's sociological evidence of alcohol challenges. And so to me, one of the things that people always say about psilocybin is that it can connect. It can connect you to yourself, which I'm kind of hearing you said. It can connect you to the universe, or it can help people deal with the epidemic of loneliness that is across culture within the United States, but maybe more intense in places like Minnesota, which also I have to say, having lived there during large parts of the year, it's really cold and gray and snow. Right, that doesn't add to the cheerfulness. I'll just say that.
Nah. No, you're spot on. I think here we look at winter is coming along and it's the perfect opportunity to root on our favorite sports team and run to the bar and stay warm wearing our flannels and head to the nearest meat raffle. I'm not sure. But uh yeah, I mean the bottom line is there's booze everywhere, and throughout the nation. But yeah, it's tough being in Minnesota. I think it's really true about, I think I've been hearing, instead of Minnesota nice, we say Minnesota ice.
Whoa.
Because it's that surface level. Hi, how are you? You're gonna get a hi from me and nothing more. Yeah, and I think and we'll get into it, but I do work with a lot of people who are feeling this level of isolation when it comes to understanding alcohol, because at some point it really doesn't fit fit your vibe or fit your life. And the yeah, yeah, to me it's just a tremendous opportunity to use a medicine like this to explore kind of the why, and show you, it illuminates these ideas of why you're turning to this poison, right? So yeah, I look at it as a tool for exploration that's going to help you feel held, at least when I sit with it. And yeah, Minnesota. Just getting back to that, it's I I wish there was more opportunities for people to connect, outside of a bar or outside of church, because when it does get dark and cold, it can get pretty damn lonely.
Yeah. Let's say you are Bob and Judy that are living in, I don't know, Edina, which is a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and you've got a son who is away at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota. I really do know Minnesota.
You're doing great.
And it is winter, and you are feeling isolated and bit depressed, and your marriage may not be what you want it to be, and you are hearing this. You're not necessarily familiar with all of the terms. Maybe explain to us, or to Bob and Judy, what exactly is a microdose, and does that give you
Sure.
the whole range of hallucinate, or what's the difference between that and other types of ways people might use magic mushrooms, psilocybin?
Sure. Yeah. So when we talk about a microdose, we're really talking about a small, small dose. So it should be subperceptual. There really should not be any big feelings of intoxication. It should be kind of just this low key, I feel like it takes the edge off. And it's very somatic to me. So I feel kind of like a body warmth, or just, again, kind of just this feeling of being held. Then we can, move in. I think they say a microdose is typically about 0.3 grams and less. And then we start looking into our mid dose, or a lot of people might say a museum dose. And I like to call a mid dose a museum dose. I look at it as something where you're taking a mid dose, so you do feel some intoxication, but you're able to walk around like you'd be at a museum and function and checking out the beautiful art, and kind of entering this realm where there's some heightened sensations and visualizations, and you're kind of like toying with the intoxication level. And then we move into a larger dose. A lot of people might call this a therapeutic dose or a healing journey. I prefer a breakthrough experience. But ultimately, yeah, you're consuming enough medicine, a macro dose, a hero's dose. And for me, these experiences have been ultimately so profound. But the idea is with, and we can get into some of the macro experiences, but the idea is when we're talking about microdosing, it's the idea that a small dose accumulatively over time will, it kind of is working behind the scenes, if you will. So when we talk about microdosing, it truly is a commitment. You're going to want to microdose for 4 to 6 weeks, and ultimately it can be totally transformational if, in this 4 to 6 week period. And then we never look at the medicine as a silver bullet or a magic pill. But the idea with some of these macro, larger dose situations is you are consuming enough medication where you're ultimately surrendering, and you're allowing the medicine to kind of take you, and do its magic. And this is where we can have, the most beautiful, profound experiences, but they can also be, like I said, psilocybin is an illuminator. So there can be challenging times where you are, brought back to maybe some trauma, maybe some, it's kind of like peeling back the layers. And So there can be some trying times throughout a journey, but also some beautiful, I like to say, gifts or realizations or just insights that you've, you know, received, and you can't even necessarily put it into words, but it's just this knowing or this essence of understanding. And um, yeah, so much of it is ineffable. It's so hard to,
Mhm.
put into words. But yeah, I think for me, um, I had my first mystical experience, which I consumed, I'm going to say probably about 6 grams. Um, and that is when I had finally had enough. When I was kind of in my self exploration days, self admittingly, I was pretty haphazard. I wasn't really measuring my medicine. I was just kind of in taking it. So, on this first night of consuming, which must have been quite a bit, I was um, yeah, just blown away. I was for the first time really kind of isolated, and I had music, which I think was a big piece. I had this portable speaker, and I was just kind of like tuning into
Mhm.
this music. And as I mentioned before, my grandfather passed away the night that I had called him to deliver some terrible news, and I just started missing my grandpa. I said, man, what a wonderful man he was. I never really had the opportunity to grieve him because he was 85 when he passed, and we had had these other
Yeah.
extreme baby losses. And I just was thinking about my grandfather, and I don't know how, he wasn't there. I didn't see him, but at some point, it was like we were connected consciously, and I could hear him. I could hear his voice, and he was talking to me. And I was again thinking about him and just really sad and kind of weeping tears of sadness. And it was like it didn't startle me or anything, but he was talking to me and he said, "Maggie, darling, you're not crying tears of sadness anymore. You're not sad. Look at your life. You've quit drinking. You're a healthier, happier mother." And it was true. It was, it had been about 8 months after I had stopped consuming alcohol and crying on the daily. And I didn't even know it. I had just kind of like shifted out of this place of sadness. And he was there and he was telling me, and he goes, "Maggie, um, and this journey was about 6 hours, and there's plenty that happened, but his main message was, you're here to share your story and tell people how they can use psilocybin as a tool to overcome so many things like you have." So that's what I've been trying to do since this my first mystical experience, which was over 3 years ago. Um, and yeah, I believe that these medicines, when we think about it, they've been around for tens of thousands of years, and there's a lot of reverence and responsibility that comes with working with the medicine. But I believe it's helped human evolution, and I'm loud and proud about wanting to help other people understand and just normalize conversation around all of it.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit more about that story with your grandfather in a few minutes, but I want us to step back a little bit in the timeline and maybe discuss a couple of things that I feel are kind of hanging threads regarding that first 5 day microdose experience. So, at some point during or after that microdose sequence, you stopped drinking. I assume, but correct me if I'm wrong, that you were able to wrestle with the demon of drinking itself through the microdosing, but the drinking was predicated by this loss. So did the microdosing help you merely eliminate the drinking as this band-aid for the underlying trauma that you were dealing with, or did it also enable you to work through some of the challenges uh, regarding all this grief that you had to face suddenly? Or did dealing with that grief come later after the microdosing in your psilocybin journey?
That's such a good question, Scott. Originally the microdosing, it did provide immediate relief. in that I was really struggling. I mean, like I said, my intention for the day was just to feel normal without alcohol.
Mhm.
I was really getting down on myself. Why do I need it so badly? Why am I, you know? And so, yeah, the original first 5 days, I almost like I was having, I was worried that I was going to go through withdrawal, and many people do. And so, we have to be very careful around conversation around this. But for me, it was almost like this immediate replacement. And I don't want to, I look at mushrooms like they're medicine and they're not a drug, and they're not alcohol, but yeah, it's what I needed at that time. And um, I think in that course of 5 days, I was just having so many illuminations, and so many things were making sense about my childhood and alcohol and my behaviors. And it was almost like this open invite, like to have more, because it was just so profound these 5 days. Like I said, I could not understand why the world doesn't know about this, and who's been keeping it a secret, and what, these were my thoughts coming out of a 5 day microdosing session. That's how profound it was for me. So yeah, I looked at those 5 days and I said, I want more. I want to learn more about me. I want to understand me. I felt like it was helping me remember who I am before 20 years of marriage and starting a business with my ex and all of, yeah. So it was, to me, and not an invitation, but I decided I wanted to explore more, and that's what I did. And I would say, I have had very specific healing journeys. So I had, without even an intention, but I had had some medicine. And the same thing happened where I started grieving about my late pregnancy loss. And I had the most beautiful journey. It involved, I was outside, it involved clouds taking shape of almost like an ultrasound photo. I know it sounds
Mm.
crazy, but it was these, and I believe this is what the medicine does. It shows you through visualizations or ideations, notions, um, just different facets and different perspectives that help you see, yes, one, we are all the same, we are all connected. And two, just this idea of, I talk a lot about victim mentality, because when these tragic things happen to us,
Yeah.
we have the decision each day if we're going, to enter the day down, and it just helped me shake out of this rut. And we know that research shows it disrupts our default mode network, and all sorts of things. So I believe that with intention and kind of slowly learning that these larger journeys were really, really beneficial and really important, that I was able to really kind of pinpoint specific traumas and have kind of a focused session around it. And yeah.
Maggie, did your husband know that you were starting to microdose? And what was his reaction? I assume at some point or another he figured it out.
Well, so what's interesting, Scott, is, I first, I believe the first thing that the mushrooms did for me, actually was to give me courage to even ask for separation. As I said before, divorce was not,
Yeah.
um, so that was a result of, this. So I had already kind of moved out, and it was not a conversation I had to have while we were together. But through divorce, I was honest, and I just said, look, this has helped me tremendously. And he knew the havoc alcohol was wreaking, from his family and mine. And thankfully he's been super supportive. And I, um, yeah, so that wasn't really an issue.
Thank you for sharing that. And good for you for having that not be an issue. Let's also talk about one more thing related to that initial 5-day microdosing experience that I think is important for folks to know about. Every guest who's been on this show says that it's important to focus on your set and your setting. So it sounds like you had a good setting. You also set a specific intention. And it's a really powerful and affecting one to hear about, I have to say. How did you figure out what intention you wanted to set? It's not like, from the sounds of it, at least initially, you were working with a facilitator that could help you figure out what that might look like. What did you do to uh, feel comfortable that the intention you were creating for your experience was one that wouldn't lead to some sort of not so good outcome?
Sure. You know, I I think it's a lot of trial and error on my end. So I I think I've learned over time again that the more intentional we are, the more benefits we can receive. I really, when I work with people, I try not to get so hung up on the idea of setting an intention. A lot of people are so hard on themselves, and if they can't come up with the right words, they're doing it wrong. And
Mm,
it's, to me, I think it's, we kind of just take a step back and soften it up. It's this area of focus. You know, what is it that at the time for me, um, well, I'm not going to get into all the specifics, but for example, with, a lot of times, so I had that healing journey, what I call, when I was grieving my baby boy, but that was not my specific intention for that journey. So I often am telling people, we don't want to set many expectations at all. And it's a journey. So there's going to be ups and downs, and absolutely set and setting is everything. And so for me, I felt really, really safe taking medicine and jumping into my bed and allowing myself to move. A lot of people think we're going to be on our backs for 5 hours looking up to the sky. For me, it really is such a somatic release. So I'm in the fetal position. I'm dancing at times, I'm slobbering. I'm giving myself permission to do what I need to do
mm,
to feel release, or to cry, or to laugh, to scream, maybe punch a pillow. It's not a pretty it's not
mm.
a graceful experience, but I think that's what I need, or am that's my takeaway is, when with this medicine, there's so much that we suppress, and we walk around, people can put us down, and we just take it all in. And I believe the medicine provides us an opportunity to just allow ourselves to recognize and acknowledge what we've been through, to give it, just to feel safe. But yeah, I look at it as a cathartic release, a lot of these larger dose ceremonies.
When you described that cloud formation a few minutes ago, did that experience help you deal with the grief of losing your unborn child? Was it a longer process than that? Was it an instant into the grief, or was it the beginning of a process? If so, what did that process look like? If I'm someone who is grieving something and I'm hearing that story, what was your experience with this journey and grief itself?
Yes, I think with that specific experience, it was this acknowledgement of, damn, you went through a lot. The experience of learning our baby was no longer with us,
Mm,
to removing the baby, it still is very hard for me to talk about, but it was like the medicine showing me, Maggie, wow, you've suffered, you've gone through this horrible, horrible thing. Um, but just giving me the space to acknowledge and to sit with the sadness, and it kind of reliving just how horrific it was. And it's kind of like this idea, I like to say transmutation, but it's like the medicine kind of riles up these emotions and memories and sadness, and it's like in that moment, I don't know what's happening, but it goes from really, really, really sad and honest and rough and gross to all of a sudden just this understanding of, life. And I have to say, when I was in my drinking days, I spent a lot of my days thinking I was going to have a heart attack or a stroke. There's no
Mhm.
cancer in my family, but we have all these heart problems.
Mhm.
And I had all these fears around death and dying. And in my first mystical experience, I was showing that the earth consumes us and we join this mycelial network, and this is my new belief on life and death. And I believe that mushrooms, they literally die and bring about new life, and they transmute soil. And so I have this kind of like bigger um picture around all of it. But yeah, I think it has its special little way of sharing with you just how special you are, um, for being human and having to deal with life, and then showing you that you're not alone and you're not the only victim. And these terrible things happen across the planet every day. And, at the end of the day, we're here to be the best version of ourselves. And it's hard to start doing any of that. It took me psychedelics to understand that I could kind of take pause and explore me and my inner kingdom, is what I like to say.
Mhm.
So if it's something, um, the grief is a constant, I think. And I think it doesn't, that journey didn't necessarily take away um, the pain associated with the loss, but it definitely, what I like to say, it occupies less space in my
Mhm.
mental jungle.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think the number one message of the medicine is really connection and helping us to really take a step back, and we are so much similar to all of us than we than yeah, that's how I feel.
And this whole idea that the plants gave you this larger view of the cycle of life, us coming in one way or another, as I'm hearing it, out of the earth and then back into the earth, and that just being part of the natural process, it would make sense then that that would help you deal with grief, because like you said, you're able to pull yourself away, I would think, from seeing this through this overly singularized lens. And we also have had episodes on this show, one with a guest named John Waller, who sadly has passed away, who talked about how psilocybin helped him deal with his own impending death. If you have not had a chance to watch or listen to that episode, by the way, you audience absolutely must. Uh, but every time we talk about this subject or hit on it here on this show, or it comes up in conversation outside of this podcast, I can't help but think about his experience and this way that he was able to stabilize his feelings about. And I wonder if wherever he is now, he is watching and listening to these episodes and thinking, in one way or another, I helped be a part of this narrative that can help something that's very difficult for people to be processed. Maggie, you talked about a mystical experience. You talked about this experience with your grandpa. Were they one and the same?
Yeah, I think there's no other way to describe the experience other than mystical. And again, for the audience, this was a very long journey, and I had access to not only my grandfather, but my maternal grandmother and my paternal grandmother. And it was such an unbelievable, just yeah, I mean, I just a couple more details. So my maternal grandmother and I we had a she was like Mrs. Claus, like the
Oh,
sweetest
I love it.
grandmother
I want to.
on earth.
I wish I could
And
have known her.
she was amazing. And then I had my dad's mom, Becky, and we couldn't call her grandma. She was too cool. She's 6 feet tall, super liberal, loves Tiger Woods, an artist. She was a ceramist, and we never had any emotional connection, really. So here we have my maternal grandmother, Mrs. Claus, and we're baking cookies. And anyway, all through my journey, when I connected with uh, Mrs. Claus' grandma, we were pouring gold was it was this feeling of gold was pouring out of my soul into her. We were doing a rainbow gold chest bump where I don't know, and it was so beautiful. And my heart was racing, and I just felt like the best day. I was reconnecting with grandma, and then it came time for Becky to enter the picture, and it all everything shifted. It was like I was in a dewy kind of cold field. I wasn't scared, but it was this new energy, and she had an apology for me. And she said she never realized how funny I was, and I think she just misunderstood me my entire life. But it was just so special because it was all about these emotions that I have felt in real life kind of coming and playing a part in the journey. And yeah, it was absolutely mystical. And I had um that experience, and I'm not going to lie, you know I wanted more, and I wanted to find that again, and I have, but through ceremony and using facilitators, there's all sorts of breath work and things that we can do to deepen our experience, and we can maybe get into that. But it's really important, or I like to share that it was such a profound mystical experience that that can be suppressed too, and I did, because it happened, and I didn't share it with anyone because I'd had this crazy night. I was communicating with my grandparents. I was told, I'm here, I need to share my story about helping people learn about psilocybin as a tool. And I'm like, what do I how do I so I suppressed it, and I shoved it down, and for many weeks. And thankfully, a few, literally about 3 days after this experience in Minneapolis, Mayor Fry made the announcement that he had deprioritized psilocybin in Minneapolis only. And I just took it as this sign, like, okay, this happened to me. I'm talking to Grandpa. He tells me I'm here to share my story. And yeah, then it was deprioritized. And so I think with the medicine, it is quite magical and mystical. I feel like it connects you with the people who are needing it. I feel like it connects us. um, just it's absolutely magical in every respect, and mystical.
You have these mystical, dramatic experiences, or even less mystical ones that are in their own way, maybe more subtly and more practically, or in a whole host of other through a whole host of other dimensions, impactful. But okay, these things you experience, how do you give them meaning in your day-to-day life?
Such a good question, Scott. One of the biggest things that I have learned in all of this, and I am a forever student, it was a 10-month program to receive my psilocybin practitioner certification. And it was phenomenal, and it was online, but we did have a 10-day intensive in Costa Rica. And we participated in two larger dose ceremonies, which is phenomenal. But it was this whole idea of, yeah, what do we do after we have these experiences? And that for the first time, I came back home and I microdosed. And I feel, well, we know that when we have these kind of breakthrough experiences through a large dose setting, um, our brains enter this critical learning period where we can look at it like it's freshly tilled soil and seeds can plant. But anyway, yeah, I was microdosing and it was like it was pulling threads of this ineffable, profound time in the jungle. And just kind of like for 3 weeks, yeah, bringing me back there and saying, yeah, I heard that, I saw that, I felt that, and really trying to embody it and not forget it. And so I believe one answer to, not forgetting or just throwing aside these very impactful mystical experiences is to microdose and continue to be very mindful after these experiences and meditate and breath work without medicine as well. And so I think that's, at the forefront. We talk about integration and we throw that word around, integration, integration. But truly, I believe that the journey begins at the time of the breakthrough or at the ceremony. That's the work. That's the journey. That's where nothing makes sense or everything makes sense. And that's where we have to stay focused and instead of shoving away or moving on, really sitting with that experience that we just had, conversating, meditating, medicating, microdosing. And that's really the only way to continue kind of these threads of embodiment from our experiences.
Do you have any thoughts about how Bob and Judy or their equivalents who are listening to or watching this episode, who might be concerned about safety, can go about minimizing any risks that they have associated with wanting to minimizing any risks associated with seeking out either a microdosing experience or a full on journey with a facilitator?
Yeah, one of the number one rules is knowing where your medicine comes from. If anybody needs a safe resource, I am here to help. You can definitely find medicine in many places online, but I would just like to preface it. Yes, knowing where your medicine comes from is the utmost importance. And we are dealing with an illegal substance in most cases. Um, so there's a lot of risk, and I think with that comes a lot of worry, and it's still so stigmatized. But I think the number one thing beyond knowing where your medicine comes from is to go start slow and go slow. So the beauty with once we've established that we have a safe resource for medicine, it's full spectrum, and you really can start so slow and it's really about learning to work with the medicine. Like I said, it's not a magic bullet. You're going to have to meet it halfway. So it all comes down to this trust between yourself, the medicine, and the process. I think that for anybody who's they are deservingly so very nervous for a first time experience, but there's a lot that we can do to really quell some of these fears. And a lot of it is just basic, breathing and recognizing our amazing bodies. And some people don't have the capacity to walk. We can't, all of these things so when you just pay attention to your body, and just allow yourself to kind of feel this new energy or whatever it is, and you can quickly kind of go down the fear, or you can just kind of surrender and allow the medicine, this idea that we've been working with it literally for tens of thousands of years. It's here to support. I'm here to trust myself. I'm here to trust it. And there's this process that I need to trust. But yes, it's really mindfulness activities that can help us stay regulated. It's about keeping a regulated nervous system. And like I said, it's set and setting are so crucial. And even the people, if you're in a ceremony, it's beautiful. and you could be in the jungle and there could be an ocean and a full moon, but you've got other energies around you. And I think that for beginners, it's really not meant to be a big social thing, which could be very
Mhm.
overwhelming. So it's about really keeping your nervous system regulated, simple breath work, meditation, music can always help. Um, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Really does. And the point about if you are just starting, strongly
Mm.
considering your initial experience as being a solo one and not with all sorts of distractions and other people and their energies uh, around in the immediate vicinity, is one that has not been raised explicitly on this show yet, and it's really well taken. I love these personal stories like the ones that you have shared, because as amazing and important as the researchers and scientists and activists are as part of the overall uh, lens through which we are viewing the psychedelics world here on Webdelics, uh, people, what our lives mean, how we experience it, how we feel, how we change, are the true bottom line as to why psychedelics matter. So you're sharing so much of your own story really, really affected me. If there is one thing about your story and some of the wisdom that you gleaned from it that I'll carry, it is the idea that you said just a few minutes ago. You don't have to start off with the biggest dose possible. You can go
Mhm.
slow, small, and easy. Understand the experience that you have with psilocybin as a process, and that process can have a whole host of variations, and they don't all need to be hyper dramatic. They can be pretty minimal at first, but thinking about your relationship with plant medicine as a process is a huge reframe for me. And I thank you for that. If there is anything
Mhm.
that you would like to underscore that you've already shared with us, Maggie, or that you didn't get a chance to say, but you want to say right now, share with us, please.
Yeah, I just this idea of, I believe psilocybin, it's all about perception. So whether it's going to provide a bird's eye view, it's going to shake things up in how things were once perceived, and just be open. It's not if you're open and you're curious, I feel that answers will be illuminated. And yeah, it's just about being open. That's what I want to reinforce.
One of the things that you have done in this conversation is open minds. And I thank you so much for that. Maggie, what do you have going on in your life? You said earlier that being a herald for psilocybin and its emerging, enlarging role in the world is part of your mission. And where can people find out more about you?
Absolutely. Yes, it is my mission. You can check out my website, which is mindsonmushrooms.com. I talk a little bit about my story and my offerings. I work with people in full capacity, meaning from microdosing to macrodosing. I do one on one in person ceremonies, and I've been doing a lot virtually, Scott, actually, which I think is the future of this medicine. Kind of getting back to just allowing people to have the space to be vulnerable and be with themselves if they're comfortable. Um, so yeah, head over to mindsonmushrooms.com. I've got a YouTube channel too, Minds on Mushrooms, and just getting really excited. I've been scheduling a lot of workshops and people that are just curious about education and just learning more about the medicine and the history. Um, so yeah, keep popping in. Things are happening every week. It's actually a really exciting time here in Minneapolis. 2026, we're looking at decriminalization of psilocybin legislatively. So I just joined the working group for that. And yeah, every day just trying to share and educate like Grandpa told me.
I feel so connected with your grandpa. Thank you so much for sharing about him and about all of the other elements of your journey. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to press the thumbs up button if you are on YouTube, or the subscribe button on your favorite audio channel. And please subscribe to our channel on YouTube as well. Then once you've done that, don't hesitate to leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, or a positive remark beneath the caption on YouTube. And if that isn't enough, we're going to need you to fly over to our various social media sites where you can get all sorts of additional information about plant medicine, psychedelics, and everything else related to their renaissance from a credible, trusted source. Of course, once you've done that, you're not going to be able to resist going to our website, webdelics.com. That's WEBDELICS.com, where we have many, many additional resources from trusted, credible sources, as well as stories from folks just like Maggie that are human, keeping it real, and just might change your life. After you have absorbed all of that, please come back again for another episode of the Webdelics podcast.